best settings for street photography? Are you mad? Such thing doesn't exist. There are so many different parameters that we need to look for. Street photography is not just one kind of subjects. One moment you're photographing layers, second moment you're photographing people, next moment you're photographing a faster moving action, and the next moment a slower moving action. It's endless. Like the possibilities of what can happen on the street are endless, and also the settings are endless. There's so many things to consider, but that's we're here, right? To see what we need to consider and how to figure it out. The first question we need to ask yourself, am I photographing a single person or it's a group of people? Are these people still or they're moving? What does the light look like? Is it sunny outside? Is it cloudy? Is it rainy? Where are the people standing according to the light? Are they in the shade? Are they on the sun? And at the end, how do we want to present it creatively? Do we want to capture and freeze the motion, or we want to create something like a motion blur? Do we want everything to be tack sharp in the front of our frame and in the back of our frame, or we just want to do a portrait and kind of blur everything behind? So they are best settings, but they are best settings for a particular scenario. So what we're gonna try today is to look through a few of these scenarios and try to come up with our best settings for street photography. So the first setting we need to look at is shutter speed. Let's ask ourselves the questions that are related to shutter speed. Is the subject that we are photographing stationary? Is the subject that we are photographing is moving? How far is this subject from me? And what percentage of the frame that subject is taking? What is the lens that I'm using at that moment? Am I moving or am standing in one place? All of these questions and probably many more need to be answered before we decide on our shutter speed settings. But let's say the situation is quite simple. There is a person, he's walking and he's about 3 meters distance from us and we're using a 35 mm lens. In that situation, I think that 1/250th of a second would be a proper shutter speed. And if the person is walking a little bit faster, we might want to raise it to 1/320 of a second or 1/500th of a second. But what happens if that person is on a horse and he's galloping through the field and we're running after him, trying to capture him? So he's moving, we're moving. It means that there is a lot of movement involved here. And also maybe we're excited and our hands are shaking and we're not necessarily the most stable situation. In that case, we will have to raise our shutter speed significantly, let's say to 1 to 1000, 1 to 2000 to capture him properly. Sometimes even that is not enough. Sometimes we would need to go even to 1 to 4000. Therefore, you can see conditions do matter. All these questions that I ask you now, this is actually a thought process. This is a thought process of a photographer who is standing in front of a scene and need to decide which settings to use and which settings are best for that particular situation. He doesn't come up to the street with the best settings already set in the camera. He needs to decide what the best settings will be at the moment he's there and he's encountering the situation. Okay, so I'm speaking about an experienced photographer, but what should a non-experienced photographer do? Someone who is just starting with street photography. Is there a way to photograph without all these calculations? Well, you could put your camera on manual or use one of the half automatic modes that are in there, but then you have very little control of what is happening. I do recommend you to learn the settings to try to understand them. I know it will be difficult at the beginning, but it will be very rewarding after that. But okay, let's say that you just want a formula. Well, as far as shutter speed goes, it's kind of okay to use most of the time 1/250 of a second and 1/500 of a second. For the most slowly moving action, you will be fine with that. But again, if it goes faster, you need to go faster. If it goes slower, you can reduce your shutter speed. And then, after all, there aren't too many horses running on the street. So most of the time we will deal with people. And for the people, these settings should be fine. But if you want to learn which shutter speed settings work best for different type of scenarios, just grab my cheat sheet for street photographers down in the description. It has all the settings that you need to get started. And at the moment you start feeling confident with street photography, you can put it aside. But once in a while, you can always review if there's a situation that you're not sure which settings to put, which settings to set in your camera. You can just take a look and again, you can get an idea of how to proceed from there. So we figure out the shutter speed. It will be 1 to 250 of a second or 1 to 500 of a second. But what about aperture? What should I do with the aperture? We decide which aperture to use based on several factors. The first one is light and the weather conditions that are around there. On a sunny day, we will use a certain settings. On a cloudy day, we would use another type of settings. And on a rainy day, a different one. Is it cloudy outside? Is it raining? Are the objects that I'm photographing are standing on the sunlight, or they're hiding in the shadows? All of this can have an impact on the setting that we want to choose. On a sunny day, we will usually use something between f11 to f16. On a cloudy day, because there's less light, we will need to go lower with our aperture, for example, f8 or f5, 5.6, depends on how strong the clouds are. And at night, and when the light is very, very low, we will just open the aperture as much as we can so we don't compromise the quality of the photograph. So it can be 2.8, f2.8, or if you're a very lucky one and you have one of the more expensive lenses, it will be f1.2. Well, the other question that we need to ask ourselves is, what are we photographing? Are we photographing a single person? Or there is like a group of people? How far they are from the camera? How deep we want to see inside of the frame? You see a lot of things to consider again, and you will ask me, well, what's the formula for these ones? The general rule of thumbs is, if we're photographing a single person or a portrait, we want to bring the attention to that person's facial features. So we will open our aperture quite a lot. Let's say f2.8 or f4. We will weaken the background a little bit, just like here in that room. On the other hand, if there is a group of people and one is standing a little bit forward and the next one is standing a little bit backward, depends on that distance that they're standing, we will have to decide what kind of aperture to use. But let's say f4 would be for if you're using a wider lens, and f8 if we're using a tighter lens. In a busy market or just in a normal day-by-day street photography, f5.6 to f11 should usually be fine to capture most of the happenings around us. Similarly, for fast-moving action, trains, people passing by, runners or cyclists, f5.6 to f8 will guarantee that most of the part of the scene is in focus. But let's say we want to do layers, and layers are very popular in street photography, then we will have to increase our aperture to very high levels of f11 or f16 even, because we really want to get all the scene from the first layer to the last layer as much as in focus as possible. So we figure out the shutter speed and the aperture. What else is there? What else do I need to know to set my camera properly with the most optimal settings? Well, the next one will be ISO. The rule of thumbs about ISO is to keep the ISO as low as possible, which means that the base ISO level of the camera, which can be about 100 to 200 ISO. As the light starts going lower, we will start taking our ISO higher, because sometimes we want to preserve the other settings. Let's say that we are photographing layers, as we spoke before, and the setting is at f16. We really want to get this sharpness into the depth. But the light is not good enough. And when we are putting f16 and a shutter speed of 1 to 250, we're getting a dark image. We will have to push our ISO higher to compensate for the lack of light. So shutter speed, aperture, ISO. Is it? Are we done now? Not really. Did you forget? We also have the artistic part. We need to decide how exactly we want to present what we're seeing. What is our photographic idea and how we want to photograph it? Perhaps we want to introduce motion blur to the scene, or we want to freeze motion, or we want to blur everything behind because there is some distracting object in the background. All these are more things to consider when you are choosing which kind of shutter speed or aperture to use. That was a lot of technicality, and you will say, well, you're an experienced photographer, leave all that aside. Tell me, what kind of settings should I use to be able to just go out now and already take pictures outside? Well, the way I like to photograph is to take as much as possible out of the camera from my way. I don't want to play with settings when I'm out there shooting and when I'm in the zone. So I usually photograph with manual settings, which means that my aperture and my shutter speed are controlled by me, but the ISO is left to be chosen by the camera manufacturer automatically. And I limit these ISO settings to 6400. I just don't want it to go beyond that. Unless we're in a very, very bad situation with the light. In that situation, I'll put it by myself. I will push it upwards by myself. As for shutter speed, I would usually use 1 to 2/500 of a second, and go down on a slower action and go up on a faster action. And about aperture, we spoke about it before. It really depends on the subject I'm photographing and how much light is there. But let's say that I will start with aperture of 7.1 to 9, and my aperture is changing depending on the subject and the photographic idea that we discussed before. Good, so is that it? Can I go outside now and shoot? Well, not really. There is still one thing that we didn't spoke about, which is focusing. Most of the photographs that go to the recycle bin that they're not good enough are actually photographs that we couldn't focus properly, that we missed focus here, or we focused on something else in the scene from what we intended to. And that's a big issue. And even if today's modern technologies, the cameras are really, really good to just snap that focus right away, the camera still needs to know on which objects exactly to focus. If you have three different objects from in three different distances from the camera, on which one should it focus? Right now, I set my camera to focus on me, on my eye. So if I'm putting my hand here, it's not focusing on my hand, right? Or it does not focus on my hand on the back. It focuses on my eye in the middle. But if the camera would focus on my hand, you will not see me properly, and that photograph and that video would be useless. So we really need to figure out how our focusing system works, because there's a tracking focus, there is a eye detection focus, there is a people detection focus, and we also need to say in which area of the frame exactly we want to focus. If we want to focus on the center or on the left or on the right. And there are situations that we can decide that we don't want to use for autofocus at all, and we can use zone focusing, which is also a valid option. You just need to understand what every setting is and how exactly to use it to apply to your photography. But focusing is very important. It's not less important than any of the other subjects we just talked about. Well, I hope it was useful, and if it was, you know what to do, and see you next time.